your weekly Corner Späti. It is me, Ciarán. I'm joined by Uma.
Hello.
And Nick.
Hello.
And all the way from the US of A, Michael, how are you getting on?
Hi, how's it going?
Recurring guest and always happy to have you back.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you're in the runnings for, like, you know, grand champion of Corner Späti at this point.
Really?
Yeah.
This is like my fourth time on?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think all right, Grandmaster is Josie because she's been on the show like 12 times. But I think you're tied with Milo, if I'm not mistaken, from Trash Future. So
Cool. What an honor.
Yeah, a little bit more enthusiasm would be nice, but yeah.
Right.
Well, it's early here, so my enthusiasm will kick in later.
Excuses. All right, but
yeah. Let's get you pumped. Let's talk about the Germans' relationship to Israel and the Jewish people as illustrated by stickers.
Fun.
Yeah. Really great early morning chat. We're having Michael on to talk about his article for the Diasporist, which I have read and I really enjoyed. And the thing that sticks with me is probably the Jesus Christ, the Spice Girl sticker. Because I just have like a real kind of like, take that name out of your mouth. How dare you invoke the wonderful Spice Girl?
There are like very few times that I've seen an article pop up onto my feed that I know what it's going to be about exactly, but I'm like really stoked for it. So it was just banger after banger of some of the most insane people in this country. And I guess, like, you know, kind of just to like, I mean, if you don't know now, we're talking about the antideutsch for like the 9th time on this show. Mm-hmm. But I really do like the way that because your article kind of starts in the sense of like your own personal experience of like kind of, you know, discovering this in your time, like mostly in like Leipzig, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And kind of like, I mean, I've had you on the show to kind of talk about this before, but like, how was that then? Like, your first kind of take into this like leftist milieu that's like very bizarre, you know, and very like, I mean, we hear about it, but then to see it like up front at face value is, it's a bit like jarring sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm really glad you guys read and liked the article so much. It was really fun working on it. My first actual encounter with antideutsch was long before what I described in the article, actually, and also before I kind of really got radicalized and got my political education. So it was in 2011 during the wave of global protest, and I was in Leipzig at the time. And I just came to one of these demos against the financial system and against the austerity. This was right before this all became termed Occupy, because Occupy Wall Street, I think, hadn't really kicked off yet. This was led by Spanish-speaking people in Leipzig, kind of modeled after the movement in Spain. And I come to this demo, and there's these two weird dudes at the margins of the Platz holding up a big Israel flag. And I grew up in Israel. I did not have purely positive associations with this flag. And I came up to them and I was like, what the fuck, guys? And they basically said, oh, we're here to stage a provocation against the systemic or the structural anti-Semitism of this demo. And I was really confused. I did not have the framework to understand what they mean by structural anti-Semitism. And I actually, at the same time as I walked up to them, a classmate of mine in Arabic class walked up whose family hails from Gaza. And that was kind of the beginning of our friendship back then, because we both came up to these flag people and tried to like talk about this with them at the same time. But they very quickly just like, we're not here to have a conversation. We're here to stage a provocation. And when we kept trying to talk to them, they just like moved their provocation over. And this struck me, again, without much of a political education, this struck me as actually anti-Semitic. I was like, why the fuck are you bringing the Jews into this? I'd hung out with some of the people who organized the demo. I'd been at one or two of these demos before. No one had ever mentioned anything related to the Jews. And suddenly these German guys come and say this is all about the Jews. So that struck me as anti-Semitic. I didn't have a lot more contact with them until I moved. So I lived in Leipzig from 2007 2012. I moved back to so-called Israel, lived in Tel Aviv for a few years, did a lot of political stuff there, and then moved back to Germany, and then came back to this with a lot more of, a context in which to try to understand this. And I've been trying to understand the phenomenon ever since. And, I feel like I still only have a very weak grasp on it because it's so friggin' bizarre.
Yeah, I was like, when you referenced that long ago, I was about to award you the medal of like the first person to hear about the anti-Deutsch before setting foot in Germany. But I'm like, oh, I was in Leipzig. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I actually think I had a conversation with some anti-Deutsch in Tel Aviv before I first moved to Germany. When I was learning German, I was at this info shop and I was really excited that Germans were there. And I think I don't remember exactly what went down, but I remember like trying to connect with them and like getting this really weird vibe. And this was like in a like anti-Zionist, like probably anarchisty kind of space, where I think they were like talking about what they do in Germany and like, but I didn't have any clue what what kind of rabbit hole this would eventually lead me to.
Yeah, I think the bit that you mentioned of seeing anti-Semitism in places that don't really exist is kind of like the overarching theme that I constantly see with the anti-Deutsch. Because you mentioned that then like, oh, well, how does this like tie into it? And of course, my brain is like, oh, well, yeah, like, I mean, obviously, I think we all know that then it's like, they probably think that then like, oh, they mean that the Jews control the financial sector. It's like whenever you read like a really funny and like interesting one is when you look at like the absolutely cursed website of the Amadeo Antonio Amadeo Stiftung, and it has a whole thing about like capitalism, like capitalismus critique, and like how it's technically bad because it forces in this very bizarre narrative of like the elder protocols of Zion type of bullshit. And it's like, no, like I don't like, given, yes, are there anti-Semitic leftists? Sure. They are very much a thing, especially if you go to like, Southern European countries. Boy howdy, are some of them conspiratorial. But nonetheless, it's like this whole thing of that then like when you end up at this idea of that then it's like, yeah, any form of anti-capitalism actually has hidden anti-Semitism in it. You need to like kind of maybe take a moment to realize like, am I just seeing the Jew everywhere? Am I the problem?
I do think it does strike me, as just like a sitcom bit of just like, oh, guys, there's a protest against the global financial system down the street. I'm going to bring the Israeli flag. Brackets for good reasons, I promise.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the difficulty when trying to talk about quote unquote the anti-Deutsch is that like there isn't really a clear boundary between, like today at least in the last couple decades, between like what is anti-Deutsch thought and what is just like German weirdness or just like general weirdness. Because I think like there's a lot of people who came up in the anti-Deutsch movement have just kind of moved into more mainstream spaces. They're not really in any kind of thing that resembles the radical left anymore. They just kind of become part of the establishment. And at the same time, like I think there's been a kind of convergence of the ideas around this stuff. And there's this long-standing attempt to tar the left with anti-Semitism. I think because the right is so clearly and obviously like endemically ridden with anti-Semitism and responsible for the Holocaust. So like people who want to maybe not let the left have that have been trying for a very long time to like create a kind of narrative where the left is just as bad. And then, I mean, this isn't also where this, I think it's always important to mention that this isn't where the anti-Deutsch start. Like they don't start with these issues at all. Like they start around the fall of the Berlin Wall with actually just like leftists turning their back on the German working class and saying like German workers are only going to drive us to fascism, and we need a different path forward.
Yeah, I mean, I like speaking of the sense of like the mainstream German, you can definitely see that people like, I mean, one of probably the most notable ones who I know for a fact came up in the anti-Deutsch movement is Ulf Polschat, the head of
Yep.
Welt. He doesn't like necessarily explicitly say it, but he kind of gives these things of like, I was in anarchist circles in, Friedrichshain in like the 90s and 2000s and this and da 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 da. It's like, yeah, I'm not surprised. Your politic is very much still like encompasses a very like anti-Deutsch worldview, even though you are a right winger. You know, it does kind of give the. I think that then that you're like pointing out the sense of it is like this kind of like turning on the German working class is very much something that then kind of it like the anti-Deutsch kind of do this weird thing where they create like a genetic determinism of the German, which is very like inherently non-leftist,
Yeah.
and they kind of do embody then this idea that the only way to then move forward is through like the most severe punishment collectively against then that of the German or the other enemies then of the West.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a very interesting conversation around how do we set up boundaries around this term, because you make a very good point of it's like it's getting weird. At what point do we go from like anti-Deutsch to supporter of like Staatsräson? Because like I feel like Ulf Polschart has basically made that graduation kind of like I don't think he would ever identify with, as Nick was saying, openly with anything that might have been considered anti-Deutsch space. He's not like shout out to Jungle World or whatever. But he goes along with the Staatsräson stuff that feels like it's, I don't know, anti-Deutsch wearing like a suit and having a 9 to 5 job, kind of like almost.
Yeah, it's also hard because the people who are hardcore anti-Deutsch today, which are not that many anymore, will usually not like that term. Even though there's one actually from Leipzig, Michael Neuhaus, who I remember once on Twitter was called out for his group being anti-Deutsch, and he was like, yeah, we're proudly anti-Deutsch, but that's kind of unusual these days. Usually that term is kind of disavowed, and they call themselves Ideological, which is really funny. And then there's like ideas that have like seeped out of that historical movement into broader parts of the left that aren't necessarily identified with it, and just to broader society. And like we're saying, like it's kind of just melded into this Staatsräson thing. And I think it's important to see how this has basically been a section of the left that has like helped legitimize that kind of thinking across German society by basically removing opposition. Like you can't say this is the right wing approach. It's embraced by a prominent part of the left as well.
The kind of like turning the back on the German working class, I also find super interesting and possibly relates to something else you bring up in the article, which is the like, what was it called? Like transferred nationalism or the like nationalism of another country.
Yeah.
Which I find, because like all Germans are inherently fascist is just kind of something that like a stuffy Winston Churchill supporting British person would say about the Germans. Like it's kind of like English nationalism towards the Germans in a certain sense. But yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk about that concept as you bring it up in the article, like relating to, the imagery of the IDF and Mossad and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I draw in the article on one of the previous best pieces of writing in English on anti-Deutsch by my friend Yossi Bartal in Left Berlin from a few years ago. Very short, very good piece, where he actually quotes not Winston Churchill, George Orwell. Not much better. This is also like quoting from not a particularly good piece of Orwell, and I don't want to like come across as a Orwell fan in general, but he just has some good observations and some good language for talking about this, because I think when he talks about this in his article on nationalism, he's actually talking about like Westerners boosting the USSR. But he observes that there's this kind of, because of the disconnect between the foreign booster and the actual place that they're boosting, they're free to kind of talk about it in ways that are completely divorced from reality. They're free to be really unhinged with it. And I think
So it's like
if
me
ever
with
there's been a
China,
case-
is what you're trying to say.
Huh?
It's like me with China.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if ever there's been a case of this, it's like German support for Israel, where like in my years in Germany, the second time around when I was really trying to engage with this stuff, and also really trying to engage with these people, because I at least initially believed there was some good impulse in there, and I think there is for some people who are new to this style of thinking, if not the hardcore. My experience again and again was that there's just no interest in actually engaging on the issues. They don't want to talk about what is happening in Palestine. They want to talk about Israel as this mythic revenge of the Jews against the Nazis, even if that means you have to think of the Palestinians as the new Nazis, because you're not actually advocating for the IDF to come and bomb Berlin, So there's a lot of weirdness that comes out of that, because you're talking about a real place, but you're talking about it in terms that are entirely derived from like your inner life and from your society's like history and internal relations. And what you end up describing is very, very far from the actual IDF. There's some of the stickers that I showcase in the article, and others as well. I had to, I have like 100 of them in my album. I had to be selective. They talk about the IDF as being Antifa, and it's just really hard to even start to respond to that as a serious proposition, because it's so completely divorced from reality.
Yeah, I mean, like there is, first off, listener, look at the article, look at the stickers, follow along to like, I don't think that there's a way to describe how like bizarre some of these get. There are like some of the ones, I don't remember if it's this one that then was in your article. I think there is one, but there are ones that like Antifa heißt Merkava, and it's like a tank.
Yeah, I have one that's Straßenschlacht in Ramallah, die Panzer sind die Antifa. So
that's,
street fight in Ramallah, the tanks are the Antifa. The picture clearly is not showing Ramallah, which is a dense urban space. It's just like a couple of Israeli tanks in the desert. There's a lot of that shit.
Yeah, it is.
I think obviously besides the stickers being bullshit in general, what also really pisses me off is that they thought they were so witty and funny.
Oh, we were talking about
like they were like, this is so good, such a great, like, graphic design is my passion, this is great, and then it's just the most fucking dumbest thing that you've ever seen in your life.
If you're the guy in the anti-Deutsch circles who knows the names of various like IDF military equipment, you're the hottest shit.
Oh yeah, you're fucking. If
he probably did the master with me.
Yeah. No, you know what? You're like a borderline on the verge of being like a fedora wearing Redditor. That's what you like realistically are. I cannot describe how like nerdy some of these anti-Deutsch people are, and they are. You're right, Uma. They probably are like they actually are all like philosophy, like Adorno weirdos, but nonetheless, the thing that then I think the sticker that I see, constantly that, it does like the anti-Deutsch too did this very, very weird thing where then it's like, it's not so much the sense of like, well, we're going to like, the IDF is Antifa. That's like a clear, like, okay, you're insane. But the one that then's always very sneaky that then I'll have to like explain to people if they don't understand it is the like gegen jeden Antisemitismus sticker that like is everywhere. And it's like always weird to kind of point that like, unfortunately, whenever I see that sticker, I try to cover it up because I know what the intention is behind it, because it isn't actually the sense of like, being against every form of anti-Semitism. It is this like, other meaning sort of, I love Israel. That's what I mean. The IDF is Bay. And there is like the thing that then like that is so hard to kind of like disseminate to about the anti-Deutsch or, whatever, the ultra-Deutsch or whatever they're people calling them today, is the hijacking of like this discussion as well too. Like I feel that then that in Germany they have like that discussion, even in like left-wing spaces, what you would assume to be left-wing spaces that then of course aren't more, that you don't see more non-Germans in, just to be fair, are still stifled by this idea of gegen jeden Antisemitismus, and how that is so encapsulated within like what Ciarán was saying, like this difference between like what is actually like a fight against anti-Semitism and what is actually then just like Staatsräson put into different fancier words.
Exactly. And this brings us back to what we were talking about before, where like this is all just about tarring the left and actually just undermining the left really broadly. And that's the one thing that I have to say, like, I wish I'd emphasized more in the article, is like how much the project of the antideutsch is just an anti-left project from within the left. That is the essence of it. Everything else is details. So at first it was not about this anti-Semitism stuff, but that's what it became through the 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah, it's really, I really think it's also like just taking in this anti-left thing that comes from outside of the left and then like taking it way too seriously. Like there are a couple of, I just finished recently reading a little book that kind of covers this question called Linke Antisemitismus ? So left anti-Semitism ? And it tries to take this seriously and look at the events that are referred back to in Germany of left anti-Semitism. And, there are a couple of cases that either arguably or very clearly were like terrible, violent anti-Semitism. There was a case, I think in the 60s or 70s, I don't remember exactly, where a small urban guerrilla group like planned to bomb a synagogue for Palestine or something like that. But the thing is, like, even in that most egregious case, like, this was not just shrugged off by the German left. The German left largely, even the ultra militant milieu that these people came from, was like, this is not okay. This is not correct. But there's progressively been like a rewriting of history to be like, no, the German left has always been like virulently anti-Semitic, and has and this is like a really deep problem that we have to take very seriously and do some soul searching. And then that gets brought into like left spaces by these people. This is a lot of what the anti-Deutsch project has been, is to kind of insist that like the left has some serious soul searching to do on this, and kind of let that impede any work on anything else, and also like demanding these like over the top expressions of philo-Semitism, usually in the form of pro-Zionism, for anyone on the left who wants to protect themselves from these accusations. So it's been, I think, really really damaging and really harmful to the German left's ability to organize and to really do anything.
I do also like all of this kind of does remind me of something that I'm seeing happen in like Ireland, as well as a lot of other countries. Like Ireland is a country where conversations about Jewish people's like thoughts and feelings can really happen without Jewish people involved, because there's a very small population of Jewish people here. But usually, like the Irish Times, like mainstream publication, will bring on, will talk to a Jewish person who will write and say like they're concerned about rising levels of anti-Semitism, and they will relate that to kind of anti-Zionism, which is very prevalent in Ireland. And then you get like the anti-Zionist Jewish population in Ireland tearing their hair out, because they're basically like, no, there is a rise of anti-Semitism, but it is coming from the same people who are claiming to be diehard friends of Israel. It's like it's Elon Musk doing the Sieg Heil twice to everyone, and then claiming to be sorry when he goes visit like Auschwitz for a bit or something. As like so it's a very frustrating conversation, I think, that's happening pretty much all over the world.
Oh no, of course, like there was even like, I think a couple of weeks ago here, they like released the data of like crimes done in Germany or whatever, and it was like anti-Semitic crime is up like 400% or something like that. And then when you look at the data, they just like counted every like protest, like every
often every tweet too.
Every
tweet. Basically a philo-Semitic German can report a tweet that was about Palestine, and that will just get counted in the statistics. Really
it's kind of the thing that then it's unfortunate to see this like level of thinking happening. Like in Germany, you're kind of like, all right, like this country's dumb when it comes to this issue. It's like, I understand it. I wish that it wasn't this way. Understanding is the bad way. It's like, it's expected, You know,
I've accepted it,
but
almost.
you know, it's like I'm not gonna expect the like local, you know, Berlin, like, you know, criminal, like whatever the criminal, whatever the fuck it's called, to then actually have like an understanding properly of what is and what isn't anti-Semitism. You know, it is this kind of like Germany does use the big box of, you know, a Palestinian flag is the same thing as a swastika to, you know, in some cases.
All right, head of Berlin police coming out on a podium giving a press announcement.
Do not
like,
even talk about her.
Like,
I can't stand her. Don't. No.
I know, but I'd just be very funny if she was like, guys, I just finished reading Edward Said. I have thoughts about stuff.
Do you remember the time that she announced that most anti-Semitically motivated violence was against police officers? That was funny.
I do remember that.
I was thinking of exactly that. Of that. Then even the cops are apparently Jewish or some shit. I don't know.
Okay, new expanded character, just the third worldist version of this, of just like, I've just finished reading Edward Said, and then like there's an attack against the cops as like pro-Palestinian protesters are doing Orientalism to us. Please stop them.
But that does speak, I think, to kind of weird thing that goes on with Germany. Probably not only with Germany, but especially with Germany, where like Germany wants to replace the Jews without eliminating us, but like Germany wants to take the place of the Jews. Like there aren't that many Jews in Germany. Germany needs like its Jews to show that it's changed. But also it kind of really wants to be in the position of like the victim of anti-Semitism, not the perpetrator. And there's like all these weird ways that Germany, like what they say in German, inszeniert sich, like puts itself in the scene as the victim of anti-Semitism.
It really is, yeah. And we've mentioned on the show multiple times that Germany is one of the oddest examples of it. I don't think I've ever seen the victim or like the perpetrator of one of the worst, you know, atrocities in modern history go and turn around and like make itself always to be the like forever victim of this. Of like, oh, you don't understand, like, oh, ooh woo, it was like, you know, it was the 30s and things were different, and you know, we just accidentally did this thing or whatever. But please understand us. You know, we're the most true understanders of this thing that we've constantly actually historically been really bad at understanding what anti-Semitism is. It isn't like the Holocaust is not the only example of Germany being like, you know, virulently anti-Semitic as a culture, or as like a dominant culture rather.
I was just gonna say Germany's just a bunch of, what's his name? Daniel Ryan Spalding or whatever.
Oh God.
Yeah.
The fuck. Like just people pretending to be Jewish and getting upset about, you know, anti-Semitism that doesn't actually exist about this, obviously.
You jogged my memory. Exactly, Uma. Thank you. That is the other thing too, that then Germany is so weird.
We're going to talk about Daniel Ryan Spalding.
No. Not Daniel Ryan Spalding, but it is
I'm out.
Yeah, no. Yeah, thank you, Michael, for coming on.
We're now turning this podcast into a reacts podcast to his video.
No, but the formation of then like this position under Merkel of like the Antisemitismusbeauftragte, and how many of those people fall into exactly like that like type of person of typically they're all probably Christian people pretending that they are the truest understander of the Jew, which is like bizarre thinking, you know, like, and
extremely.
One of the I can't remember, I think it is Felix Klein, who is like the federal one, is legitimately a like a Ted Cruz type of evangelical that like thinks that the Jews must return to Israel in order for God to like kill them all. You know, like,
I didn't know that, but I do know that he's often been mistaken for a Jewish person because of his name, because of all kinds of things about how he presents himself. And even I think last year it was uncovered that on the website of some Italian university where he did some short thing, they actually described him as a German Jew. And he did not correct this until this was called out on Twitter.
Oh,
like, for years he let that be written down.
Loved it. He was like, finally. It's like, you know, it's like it's like when you're like a white suburban child in the US and your friend, like your black friend, calls you the N-word.
Yeah, it's so much of this. I always get like Nick mentioned earlier. This is like the millionth time we've talked about the anti-Deutsch, but to be fair, like it is such a bizarre phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
It is one that is also just like aggressively contained to the geographical area that is like Germany, maybe Austria.
A little bit of Switzerland too.
Fair enough. The German-speaking world, let's say that. Yeah. So it's like there's a hard stop on like, you know, the Polish and Dutch borders of this ideology existing, and that's just like that. Even as a phenomenon, is crazy. Like usually, like ideologies can spread across borders. I
will say that, like, I think it's again because it's so because the boundaries of this ideology are so fuzzy and it overlaps with other things. Like there are ways that it has influenced parts of the U.S. left as well, especially through organizations like Platypus, which I have an ambivalent relationship with. I don't want to demonize them. I think they platform a lot of important discussions, and they've interviewed me, and I think they're very good at generating real discussion on the left. However, like they've definitely helped like bring some parts of anti-Deutsch thought into the American left. And I think a big part of that is also like the stuff that they kind of take from Moshe Postone, who was, you know, a Canadian Jewish Marxist, maybe post-Marxist professor here in Chicago, at the University of Chicago, weirdly enough. And like they kind of took some stuff out of his thought and developed it further, and like that's kind of helped disseminate some ideas that I think are also kind of end up serving the same purpose of just making it really hard to do anything on the left. So the main thing there is, I mean, I mentioned this phrase, structural anti-Semitism, which in 2011 I had no way to understand, but for the anti-Deutsch and maybe for Postone, that means this that when instead of attacking capitalism as a totality and as a structure, you focus your attacks on like individual bearers of this structure, for example, the bankers in Europe in 2011, that is doing the same kind of misdirection that happens with anti-Semitism, where a group is singled out as the bearer of the ills of modernity and of capitalism, and it kind of drives towards this non-solution where that group is eliminated. And aside from the obvious fact that this is, genocidal and a terrible violation, the problem for the left is also that even if that group is, bankers and not like an ethnic or religious group, you don't end up eliminating the system, because that doesn't actually change the structure of the system, and someone else will just have to come in and fill that role. So I think that's a thought that I think has some merit to it, and I think is not something that should be just like ridiculed and ignored like most of anti-Deutsch thought. But taken to the extreme that they take it, it ends up just being another way of saying you can't actually do anything against capitalism concretely, except have reading groups and discuss how it's a bad system. But any concrete person or institution that you want to target in your struggle against capitalism, well, that's doing anti-Semitism, whether that person has anything to do with the Jews or not.
Yeah, there is I think that's another, you've mentioned a couple of times already about how the anti-Deutsch movement is something that then's inherently it's like anti-leftism from internally within the left. And the thing that I've always kind of found so interesting about them isn't so much that they're like Israel politics stuff, whatever. It's like that kind of is actually one of the least interesting aspects of the anti-Deutsch, if you ask, just from my opinion. It's all the other kind of weird stuff that is in that basket as well, of the very pro-American nature of them, for they're very inherently anti-imperialism, and they kind of establish themselves as such. And there is very much this kind of, and everyone can kind of be they're an op. Agree or disagree, there is there is kind of this I would put them always in the category of this good boy and girl leftism, where you want to pretend that you're left wing, but you don't really want to have anything that then steps on the toes of anyone. The anti-Deutsch have kind of always been pro every U.S. intervention since their inception. they're very, like they're constant, even like, stickers and stuff like that they do kind of have this like very pro-American tinge to that. Not even tinge, they are openly pro-US, and they do kind of come down to this type of politic that I think is very interesting, of that it is like, well, that other type of leftist stuff is actually incorrect. Being a good leftist is actually going with whatever the status quo is, but I get to have the aesthetic of, being whatever, like living in a squat or supporting squats and having this kind of like anarchist sort of lifestyle. And, they're very like particular about like, they're like overly supportive of like the Kurds, because it kind of allows like, one, the Kurds is like, not to have a discussion about that of like, them being supported by the US, but, like US backed the YPJ sort of deal. They kind of embody the stuff of like, oh, well, it's like a other version of leftism that like isn't technically Marxism, this like the democratic confederalism, and the overarching kind of attitudes, depending on like which Kurdish groups you ask, is also very pro-Israel. Maybe not the YPG and the YPJ, or especially not the PKK, but like the Peshmerga are openly Zionist, and there is kind of this thing of these nitpicky sort of things of leftist politics that they like, but aren't very like, they are still very against, whatever the West doesn't like, they're also on board with that, which is very weird, like,
yeah, and I think that kind of, I would say maybe not good boy and girl, but like pick me leftism is kind of like better, really evident in how they function in German politics, where like I know that within the left party they generally are kind of on the side of like, let's assume moderate positions and try to get into government, rather than, that's the big debate within the left party is always like, should we be trying to get into government, or should we be staying the course and building a oppositional coalition? And they tend to be the ones who want to like take these really milquetoast positions and get into government, or at least they support that faction. And like, I think this is also the part of like a broader phenomenon. I think this might also have played a role in why they became so pro-Israel, because like I think this is something you guys have discussed probably more than once before, like the way that actors like Giorgia Meloni in Italy will like become like they have like basically fascist politics, but they'll assume these geopolitical positions that are like the entry card to like NATO and to normality in the West. And a big thing in that area for a long time has been supporting Israel. And I think this is kind of, I think another motivation in how they get to that kind of position.
There's also like a degree of like self-selection. I think something we've talked about with the anti-Deutsch in the past was previously I wasn't around in Germany for this happening, but the vibe I get is somewhere about like mid-90s. They were like they were the strain of the left that you would certainly see on TV, like the kind of when you have those like talking heads kind of shows, the kind of like leftist voice in the room that they have out of some sort of like broadcasting standard bylaw they have to have there. They don't want them to be there, but would usually be the kind of come from an anti-Deutsch circle. Again, maybe I didn't describe themselves as such, and maybe now they're Ulf Polschart, but like that kind of thing. And it is kind of like, well, the self-selecting kind of comes of like, well, of course, that's the strain of the left that gets put on the television because they don't disagree with these huge kind of like foreign policy red lines that you're never meant to cross. And thus, they are put in front of everyone in their German household, which just propagates their numbers further, at least up until a time. So like it just becomes this kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
I think the terminology of like a pick-me leftist fits that then perfectly, of like you get to go on TV because you're the special one that then actually is like, no, like not all leftists.
I'm not like other girls.
Yeah, I'm not like, I mean, that's the thing too, is that then, Nicky Potter, my boy is on TV all the fucking time because he's apparently a leftist, but yet he like writes a book about how he understands that the left, like that what the left really is. And again, yeah, they just do like they're doing right-wing politics at the end of the day. They're constantly just it's like a circular firing line around the left,
Yeah.
and he's fine within, because then I guess that comes into the sense of then someone's own personal gains of like, do you want to be like an op-ed writer? Is that your like, do you want to be a Paul Mason figure, or do you actually want to like contribute to the left, or you just want to like, pamper your own, your own resume?
Mm-hmm. I think it really can't be like overstated how much like this whole phenomenon of the antideutsch is really an outcome of the immediate aftermath of German reunification. And there's one aspect of this that I hadn't really thought of in such clear terms before I read this piece a few months ago by Gerhard Hanloser, who's like maybe the German academic expert on the antideutsch. He wrote an article actually for Platypus, again, points for Platypus on this, on something, the title of something like the supposed achievements of the antideutsch, where he says like even the opponents of the antideutsch will kind of like ritualistically say like, yeah, they get some points on this and this and that, but like but whatever. And he says like, no, actually, if you take a look at the specific things that they're lauded for, they suck at all of them. Really powerful piece, I think, really helpful. And one thing he mentions there is that one of the things that attracted people to this movement, and one of the reasons that it's like so prominent in East Germany, in places like Leipzig, is that in the immediate aftermath of the dissolution of the GDR, this was a position that was very, very clearly distinct from the old system and from your parents' and grandparents' politics. They were all anti-imperialist, anti-Zionists. You are a pro-imperialist, pro-Zionist. So you can like rest assured that you are not just like following in your parents' footsteps, but you still get to feel like you're on the left. You still, and this is not just an illusion. You are still fighting Nazis. Like let's not forget, like these people were putting their bodies on the line and like getting in street fights with actual Nazis in the 90s all the time. And I think that is like really significant and really like a kind of, what's it called? Like a forge that kind of like, really galvanized this movement through some really tough times. And that's still remembered to this day in the place where this happened. Like I've had very few like real honest conversations with antideutsch because they kind of avoid it. But one time I did. And this person I was talking with had grown up in a small town outside of Leipzig, where there's a lot of Nazi activity, and they just said like the antideutsch were the only ones coming from the city to help us organize against this. Like all the other leftists were like, why are you living there? It's full of Nazis. And the antideutsch were like, no, like stay and fight, and here's how, and here are resources, and I think that's like a really significant factor in the staying power of this movement, even though it's like ideologically it has very, very little to offer. But in terms of the development of the struggle on the ground in these areas, they did some real stuff, and that kind of was just orthogonal to the positions they took on other things.
Yeah, I mean, like I know in the sense of like having discussions with like people, especially in Berlin, who are in like the anti-imperialist left, who have had to like have the realization of like, oh, there's an anti-Nazi march or protest that's happening, directly like across from the most recent one I think was the one that was in Friedrichshain here, like a little while ago. And there is that like weird coordination that they like kind of have to do because they're aware of it, of like, hey, they do put themselves on the line to, fight Nazis. I think there's a legitimate conversation that then could be had. I mean, the 90s are, gone and whatever, and that was definitely a different era. I would probably make the argument now today that then probably going and bashing a Nazi skull, you and your buddies, is probably not the best thing to keep the left going in Germany. Mm-hmm. Just strictly from the sense of, again, it weirdly is one of these things that then intentionally or not, ends up backfiring against the left constantly. There are other ways to actively, do stuff against Nazis. But I mean, that's the thing too, is that even like all these platforms, are, I don't know which ones specifically, but there are, like indie media is one in Germany that then kind of like very heavily does like research against, against active, Nazi groups, this and that, trying to like uncover who's doing what. I think I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of the groups that then found out that, like someone like Björn Höcke was like writing under like a pseudonym, being a member of the NPD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These people are like, I don't want to say more often than not, but it's not surprising when you come across them and they're anti-Deutsch. You'll be looking at through a lot of these like, researches that they do against actual Nazis, and then you'll find yourself also then on the same page looking at them trying to like dox members of the the pro-Palestinian community, and that's where it gets like very problematic, because yes, like the thing about these groups as well too is that they are very good at what they do, and they kind of do like it does create also a very unsafe environment as well for people who are active within the left that don't see eye to eye with them, because they do have a lot of resources in their legitimate anti-fascism of like, combating Nazism. But they do also,
then they bring those methods into
doxing
like,
the anti-imperial. Exactly. Yeah. And they are like, it's kind of the thing too, when I constantly like mention to people of like, they're like, oh, the anti-Dutch are so goofy. Like they're goofy, but they're also like kind of like a force. Yeah. A scary force to like reckon with.
Yeah. And I think all of this, like a concept that I think helped me kind of contextualize all this a little bit is the concept of bourgeois anti-fascism, bürgerlicher Antifaschismus, where like this is something, once you have a term for it, you see it everywhere in Germany, because it's such a big part of like how the state defines itself and how like most political parties define themselves. But it's like, it's very distinct from like actual anti-fascism, which is leftist and identifies the roots of fascism in the present order. Instead, it's all about like fascism is much worse than the present order, which hands down it is. I mean, if you're in a place where fascism isn't the present order. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that I am anymore. But in Germany, I think we're not quite there yet. And like, obviously, fascism is worse, but like, there's a certain kind of anti-fascism that is just about defending the status quo, and this kind of anti-Deutsch Antifa kind of, I think, ends up being just a kind of a left annex to that, where they're like, they pay lip service to how like the problem is capitalism. But essentially, like they're kind of part of the same broader project, and they kind of want to be part of that and be connected with like with the bourgeois center.
I think that is kind of like something I find particularly interesting as I look at the like, again, like I had to look at the history of anti-Deutsch, like, purely from like the hindsight 2020. I know what they're like now, but I could see what it was like in their heyday of the 90s as a distant observer. It does feel like there was this little bit of, okay, we'll have a guy as a talking head on the TV show who is like from an anti-Deutsch publication, got to start in some sort of like anti-Deutsch squat or whatever. That's his like left bona fides. But he'll be on the panel tonight to talk about like housing policy in Germany, or like healthcare reform, or something that is kind of like not necessarily associated with the anti-Deutsch as we know them today. But like the left always has opinions on these things. We have opinions on everything. But like now it really does feel like it's been like we've been letting this sit in the pot for a while, and all of that has boiled away. And what's been left with is just the kind of like very Zionist position as the thing. Because like the equivalent of Nicholas Potter back in the 90s, I think, was being invited on to talk about more things, but now I feel like he's only invited on television and respectable publications to talk about how the left is anti-Semitic and we must support Israel.
And in a very real way, he and people like him are, they may imagine themselves as being in some way anti-German and opposed to the German state, but like they're basically operating as an extension of the state, especially when the police apparatus is so interested in persecuting people who express any kind of solidarity or even empathy for the Palestinians. Like the people who are out there like denouncing and building the case against anyone who's in that area. Like they're just really working as an extension of the repressive apparatus. And it's really strange that they managed to hold this in their head and still like take on this radical anti-establishment air. But I tried in my article, I like raised one kind of hypothesis as to how we really get from this like turning our back on the working class but trying to stay left to genocide in Gaza is somehow Antifa. And I think a part of it, at least, is that turning your back on the working class and trying to maintain a militant left position requires some kind of figure to at least imagine doing the militancy. And you can't pick yourself because you're a German and German bad. And you can't pick anyone in Germany because Germany bad. So you have to look outside of Germany. That's where we get to this what do we call it? Transfer nationalism, Ersatznationalismus, where you have to kind of bring in some external figure that you imagine to be carrying out this fight, because otherwise you just have to admit that you're just kowtowing to the status quo, which is what they're doing, to be clear. But they have to at least imagine that they're like supporting some external force that is fighting that status quo.
And I think, thank you, Michael. This is where we're going to end actually the serious portion of this conversation, because the next and probably the most important question I have for it is, what was your favorite sticker? Go.
It's really hard to choose, and I'll tell you, like, narrowing it down for the article was really painful because there's like whole types of stickers I had to leave out. What is my favorite? I'm just looking at my full album right now as we talk.
We should make this clear for listeners. You took these stickers off as a form of protest, but you did keep them in your own personal notebook.
So actually, I just took pictures of them, and then when I was working on this article and I mentioned it to friends, they connected me with someone who had been doing similar thing but keeping them physically in a notebook, which is much, much better for the photos. So like half the photos in the article are from him. Most of them, and he didn't want any credit, so I'm not mentioning his name. Sure. But most of them were stickers I already had, and he just gave me like. First of all, I found out there's a lot of reprints where they like redo the design a little bit this way, which is really interesting.
Oh, so you had a first edition.
Yeah, for some of the dumbest stickers, like there's one I have in the article, which is like "Wir tragen Gucci, wir tragen Prada." Toten hast du the Intifada. There are two like completely different versions of that have a similar design. It's definitely the same person. The wording is a little bit different. The typesetting is different. So like these people really do think they're extremely witty and these things are really funny.
Yeah.
But if I have to pick a favorite, I guess I have to pick the one that I feature twice in the article, the beginning and the end, which is incredible to me, which is this one where you see, again, an Israeli tank in the background. They love those tanks. And it says something like, "Shut your shut your dirty fool mouth, you anti-Semite, or I'm going to park America in it."
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
Like it's so unhinged.
It is. Yeah. It is. Because in German, unfortunately in German that grouping of words is like makes more sense.
It works. It works pretty well.
It works pretty well. It doesn't. I guess. Yeah, it works as well as an antidote.
What the fuck are you guys doing?
Yeah, but it is. Yeah, because it's like that's one that then I see all the time. Just different variations of it. It's just like shut your fucking anti-Semitic mouth, and it's like either like an IDF soldier or like always. Yeah, they love the Merkava tanks. Or some iteration of one or the other, and they love it. It is very insane to me as well too, of just like how fetishistic they are about like, because it's this thing too that it isn't so much the sense of like, oh, I love I support Israel, which is bad politics to begin with, but they are obsessed with Israel and they are obsessed with the IDF, and it is like in a like beyond unhealthy way.
Yeah. Some of these people in Leipzig have gathered donations for the IDF. I think not in the last 2 years, but like a decade ago, they were gathering donations. They were encouraging volunteering. There was this one dude from Halle who like actually went to Israel in the beginning of the genocide and was like begging to be let into the army and was just like completely ignored because like he's not Jewish, he doesn't speak Hebrew. Like they had way too many volunteers from within Israel.
Yeah, he was the one who was going with like the poster at the Knesset being like, I want to join. And he made an Instagram of like day whatever of trying to join the IDF or whatever. And immediately when I saw that, I'm like, he's German. You know, I didn't even.
I can't believe the German Mr. Beast did that.
Yeah, I didn't need to know anything else about him. And then like, of course I clicked on it to be like, am I right? Boy, howdy, was I right? But yeah, I is he still there? I bet he is. Like,
no, he gave up after a couple months.
Quitter, loser.
Maybe he stayed in Israel, but I don't think he's still trying to get drafted.
Yeah. I myself, I think I have a special shout out to the if you want to be my lover, you have to support Israel. You got to stand with Israel. That's madness. And again, take their name out of your mouth. The one with that just has Scooter's face over and over again is deeply unsettling.
Yeah. That was really, I described this in the article too. That was such a weird experience. You know, I'm just walking on Tschochische Straße in Leipzig, you know, to my favorite restaurant with my dad, and suddenly we see this big Israel flag. And like, I didn't know that this is Scooter. You know, I really don't give a shit, but like, I got the general idea. I had enough context. But my dad was just like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, you know, infinite sympathy to yourself having to explain even a fraction of this to your own parents. Like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the article, Stickers Against Germany by Michael Sappir. Thank you, Michael, for coming on. The link will be in the description. Anything to shout out, Michael?
Just, you know, the Diasporist for, you know, making this project possible. You know, I was part of starting it. I think it's a really great publication. You can subscribe, and please do send a little donation their way if you're able to. That's really helpful to keep the project going. It's you know, an independent publication that relies on that kind of support. They publish everything in English and in German, or as much as possible. So it's helpful for also sending to your German friends to help them see how outsiders view their crazy country. So yeah, definitely subscribe, donate, and share the content there.
Hell yeah. And with that, all that remains to say is, again, thank you, Michael, for coming on. And we will catch you, the listener, on the bonus feed. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.